really want that ability.
To rewind, start over.
1,000% worth it. Trust me. If we had a rewind button, yes, we would pay you that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh.
Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a CPA podcast presented by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The center is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the Chartered Professional Accountant profession in Alberta. For the record, this CPA podcast isn't about bean counting. Our episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics. I'm Gordon Turtle, the host of this episode, and on this episode of Uncommon Sense, we wrap up our conversation with two distinguished leaders of the CPA profession in Alberta, Ruth McHugh, FCPA, FCMA, MBA, and Chair of CPA Alberta, and Rachel Miller, FCPA, FCA, and Chief Executive Officer of CPA Alberta. If you haven't listened to part one of this two-parter with Ruth and Rachel, I invite you to do so. Over the course of her career, Ruth McHugh has held several leadership positions in the public and private sectors. As well, she has served on multiple boards in both director and chair roles. She was instrumental in leading the Alberta accounting profession through its unification process back in the 2010s and is currently in her second year as chair of CPA Alberta. Her blend of C-suite and board experience has given her unique perspectives on how boards and leadership teams can come together to achieve goals. Rachel Miller has a long history of national leadership in the CPA world. Like Ruth, she played a critical role in the creation of the CPA profession and has led CPA Alberta since its inception in 2015. Prior to working with CPA Alberta and its predecessor organizations, Rachel worked in a variety of roles at local and national accounting firms. She has a passion for the profession and in developing future leaders. Welcome back, both Ruth and Rachel.
Thanks for having us.
It's so fun to be back.
So we left off last time talking about leadership and experiences in leadership and advice for young leaders. One thing I did want to ask you both is, you're both chartered professional accountants. Can you talk about how your CPA designation has helped you achieve success as leaders? Are there skills and competencies one learns as a CPA that contribute to effective leadership? Who wants to kick that one off?
Do you want me to start, Ruth? Okay, I'll kick that one off. I think the designation really is that piece that opens the doors. So getting your designation opens the doors for your future success. It's really what you individually do with that designation that makes the big difference as you move forward. But some of those foundational skills that you learn going through the designation process and becoming a CPA, you're going to carry with you always, like strategic thinking, analytical skills, professional skepticism. I'm pretty sure the handbook has changed so far away from what I originally learned that most of it's not relevant, but it was that process of learning to learn those standards that allows me to pick up the handbook now, which I still enjoy doing, and reading it and understanding it and being able to apply it today.
What do you mean by professional skepticism?
Really being able to look at things and see where something might be missing or something might not be quite accurate there. And you need to dig a little bit further to make sure that what you're hearing or what you're seeing is actually the full story, the whole story, or the truth.
And is that something CPAs are trained in?
Absolutely. It's a core fundamental skill set for auditors and for assurance work.
Ruth, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my view, like Rachel, the CPA designation does open so many doors. And I think in part, particularly when one is in leadership roles or different board governance roles, accountancy is the language of business. So CPAs are fluent in the language of business. They are like multilingual business people. And so CPAs can help translate information for their management teams, for their boards, for their stakeholders. I think that so long as businesses run with financial statements and accountancy as their foundational tool of communication for shareholders, CPAs will be that interpreter. And I think that that's a pretty great role to play.
And that's an important component of leadership, is understanding the fundamentals of an organization and what's important, what the priorities are. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard on a lot of boards that if you really want to get to know the organization, serve on the audit committee.
Good to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And it's exciting. I think I would add to what Ruth said too, in that getting your CPA designation also makes you part of a profession. And being part of a profession gives you a network of people to learn from, to grow and develop with, and to leverage off of as you move forward in your career. And maybe, Ruth, you could talk about a few more things that being part of a profession has provided you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that being a CPA gives you instant credibility. So when you are speaking to a room full of people, the fact that you've got those initials behind your name, you are expected to know certain things, and you are treated with the respect that knowledge brings. So I do think that there's some real strong credibility in having the designation and being part of the profession for sure.
I sometimes hear, oh, well, an app now can do what accountants do, or AI is going to take over all accounting jobs. But it sounds like being a CPA, from what you're saying, being a CPA is a lot more than anything that an AI program can do or an app can do. Is that a safe assumption?
Oh, absolutely. And I think an AI technology can give you the data and the information. Your CPA designation helps you sift through that and be able to translate that into what a business can use as they move forward.
Yeah, exactly. That interpreter or translator role will always be value because as CPAs, we are adding value. We're adding value in the C-suite. We're adding value around the boardroom table. We're adding value in conversations with stakeholders, with governments. We have the skills and the knowledge to add value at whatever table that we're sitting around.
And technology gives us those tools to help us add that value. So.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? Actually, I think probably those same fears happened when, I wasn't around, but when like the calculator was invented, or like Excel, right? Before that, when people were like handwriting stuff on ledgers and carbon paper and stuff like that, it's like, okay, suddenly we've got Excel, so we don't need accountants anymore. No, those become tools that accountants use to leverage and bring value to their businesses.
I love how you clarified you weren't around when the calculator was invented.
Right.
I remember that day well. My first calculator cost $8,000. So if a young person approached you today and said, well, should I get a CPA designation? Your answer would be yes, I'm guessing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, yes.
You will not regret it.
One thing I've observed over the years is that leaders are frequently asked to take on new tasks. An example of that involves you, Rachel. In July, the Government of Alberta named you as a member of a new advisory committee. That committee has been formed to provide recommendations on how to improve the province's foreign credential recognition system. Can both of you comment on why it's important to have the CPA profession represented on this committee? Do you want to kick it off, committee member Rachel?
Sure. First of all, I'm super honored to be asked to join the committee. I think the CPA profession is seen as a leader in the foreign credentialing space. We've done a lot of work to really try to remove barriers and to have access to the profession and ensure that as the need for accountants grow, and being, as Ruth said, the language of business, there is a growing need for the skill sets that CPAs bring, ensuring that we have the ability to accept new CPAs in a most effective and efficient way. And even though we are leaders and we do a lot of work on this, it's always great to be able to have conversations, to learn, to grow, to develop, and to improve. Yes, we're doing a really good job, but I bet we can do an even better job. And so I'm looking forward to working with the committee members and looking forward to some of the recommendations that'll also improve how we're doing things.
Ruth, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are very similar to Rachel's. No surprise. We are very honored that Rachel will be on this committee, and I think she'll be a brilliant committee member and bring an excellent perspective. One of the reasons why this particular committee is very important is that, in my view, Canada does a really good job with its immigration policies and the infrastructure and framework and truly welcoming environment for people from other countries like myself, for example. But when you come to Canada, I think that Canada has sort of a cultural humility that's really lovely. We are open. We're diversified. We want to listen to different perspectives. We value different perspectives. And so by getting foreign trained professionals into our professions in a systematic and fair and equitable process, the quicker we can get them in, the quicker we can all learn from and take advantage of those skills that Canada needs to bolster its economy. So Rachel, thank you. Thank you on behalf of CPA Alberta and your board for representing us and joining this committee.
Oh, thank you, Ruth.
So it does bring up the question, though, like I know from talking to both of you over the years that you are frequently tapped on your shoulder to join this committee or volunteer on this group or help out with that project. And how do you manage all those constant requests that I'm pretty sure both of you deal with on an almost daily basis? Like, how do you learn to say no, or do you say no? Ruth?
Well, in our last podcast, we talked about, as CEO of your career, having your own strategic plan and your vision and your mission. And we talked about the 6-word story. So for me, I filter all decisions through my 6-word story, which is have fun, celebrate, make a difference. So if this new role that I'm being asked to take on fits within my strategic plan as CEO of my career, then I'm going to take it on. I'm going to find a way to take it on. But if it doesn't, I'm going to free up that seat for someone else that might be a better fit on that committee or activity.
I like the way you put that. Rachel?
I will say that Ruth is way better at this than me. And that's one of the things I'm loving working with Ruth and learning and growing and developing myself to say no. And I have really tried to look at it in the same perspective. Shockingly, Ruth and I are very similar in the same way and make sure that I'm not taking on too many things so that I'm not able to really fulfill the role that I committed to. And it's hard. It's tough. And you are asked to do a lot of different things and trying to figure out how to make sure that the things you are taking on, one, move you in the direction you need to go or your organization in the direction that you need to go. And for me personally, have an impact that are actually going to have an impact that are really going to make the world a better place and what small role I can play in that. And if I'm stretched too thin, I won't be able to do that. So something I continue to struggle with is saying no and figuring out where my skills are best used to make that biggest impact. So,
well, thank you both for your thoughts on that. I want to turn now to the topic of boards and board service. People listening to our podcast might not be ever invited to sit on the board of ExxonMobil, but they might be asked to sit on the board of a soccer association or some other work-related organization. So I think your thoughts on boards and board service will be really interesting. Leaders in all sectors of society are often called upon to serve on boards of corporations, government bodies, and nonprofit organizations. And Ruth, you have a long record of experience with boards in all of those categories. What is it about board service that makes it so appealing to you?
Well, Gord, I love being in a position to be an agent of success for the CEO or the organization of the board that I serve. And so I believe that the board's role is to be the agent of success for the CEO and the organization, most particularly the role of the chair. I am chair of CPA Alberta. Rachel is our CEO. I am Rachel's agent of success. My focus, my job is to make Rachel and this organization as successful as they can be. So I want to act as a thinking partner. I want to add my perspectives to the brilliant perspectives that our CEO and management team already have. I think the role of the board is a 50,000-foot view. They provide insight and oversight and foresight, and they augment all of the skills that the management team already has. So I find that to be a privileged place to operate.
Well, I want to drill down into that a bit more in a second, but Rachel, I know you've had some board experience as well. What are your thoughts on the value of board service and what draws you to it?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to what I think is important skill set in being a leader is really growing and developing others and seeing organizations be successful. And I feel that I do have some skill sets in that area. And so it's my responsibility to give back and to help grow and develop those skill sets in the next generation. I tend to focus more on smaller not-for-profits who are transitioning from a operational board more into a governance board. As a CEO, I feel like that's a sweet spot where I can really add some value because they have have the experience of working with an amazing chair in Ruth and an amazing governance board that really does understand the role of a board and really does help the CEO and the management team to be successful. And then being in that position myself, it gives me that perspective from both sides to help transition those smaller MPOs who may have started as an operational board and who are now growing, have hired some great people and are trying to transition out of that operational board into a more strategic governance board. I think that's sort of where my skill set really helps out and really has the biggest impact for organizations.
Well, I want to ask a follow-up about that. So the little I know about boards and board service, I remember hearing that operational boards should only be transitional and for a short period of time. Is there such a thing as a permanent operational board, and is that a good thing?
I think there is, because if you're looking at a very small organization, let's choose like a speed skating club, which I'm very familiar with. So you will have, you don't have the resources or the network or the organization set up to have staff. And so you as the board are also the volunteers. And so trying to make sure that you structure a board in a way that you're able to still provide that governance, and you will have to get into some of the operations. I actually have the experience through speed skating as well, which I'm very involved in also now transitioning from an organization that had a very small financial budget to an organization that's growing and developing, and being able to hire that executive director and transition into a more governance type board. Not all small organizations are going to be able to get the resources to transition. Ultimately, that's where my sweet spot is. That's where the board governance can do its best jobs. But in reality, not every organization has the resources for that.
Ruth, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a super good point. So I have a really amazing portfolio of boards. I'm very blessed to have the portfolio that I do. And the boards that I serve are in this really amazing nexus of innovation and regulation. And at first, one might think that those are dynamically opposing forces, but they're not. There is a dynamic tension between them. But if one gets regulation right and can create a framework with an unrelenting focus on the public interest, then there's freedom to operate in the innovation space. And there's trust and an ability to actually perform well in that innovation space. So I'm on a number of boards that are in that space. And so as a result, some of those boards are in startup phase, some are in scale-up phase, and some are in full, mobilization and monetization phase. And the role of the board is different in each of those phases. So just like when we were talking about leadership in our first episode, different leaders for different times are appropriate, and different board and different governance structures for different times are also appropriate.
Excellent. So here's a question for both of you. What do you think is the recipe for achieving a high-performing board, in your view? And on the flip side, what factors and mistakes lead to a poorly performing board? Ruth, you want to kick off on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think sort of building on our last comment that it's really important to understand where in the organizational development cycle the organization is, so that you understand what kind of board you need. Is it more of a hands-on operational board in a startup? Is it transforming to be a governance board in sort of the scale-up phase? Or is it a full-on governance and perhaps regulatory oversight board, for example, if you're regulating a profession? So understanding the mandate of the organization and matching it with the right kind of governance and the right kind of board, I think, is a really important place to start. I think then the board needs to understand its role vis-a-vis the role of management, and the board's role vis-a-vis the role of the committees of the board. And in a regulatory environment, for example, there's an added interest in that some of the committees of the board are designed by statute. They're statutory committees called for in the Act, and they're independent of the board. Yet the board still has fiduciary responsibility for oversight of the profession. So there can be some very interesting dynamics that it's important to understand for all board members to be aligned on their role and for the board and management to be aligned on each of their respective and important roles. So I think getting that alignment right is crucial to start with.
Rachel, any thoughts on what makes the board work well or maybe work not so well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was kind of build on what Ruth said. The relationship with management, I think, can make a significant difference in how a board functions and how management functions. I mean, super fortunate with the boards that we've had at CPA Alberta to really have that right relationship between management and the board, that trust, the respect, but also the professional skepticism, the asking the good questions and really challenging and providing the expertise in areas in which the board members are working to provide different things for me as a CEO to think about, but not directing where the organization goes. So really that positive relationship between the board and the CEO makes a huge difference. And I think that would be your flip side. What makes a board unsuccessful is if you do have very strained relationships with management. I imagine as a management in that situation, it would be very challenging. And as a board, it would be very challenging there. And I think going back to what Ruth said in the beginning is understanding where the board is at, what kind of board is needed, what kind of governance is needed for where the organization is. And if you have that right, it's amazing. If you have that wrong, that can be very challenging as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about, like, boards evolve. They don't start out one way and stay that same forever over the course of an organization's lifespan. So I hadn't thought about that. So just building on what you were talking about, Rachel, Ruth, you're the chair, and Rachel, you're the CEO of CPA Alberta. Can you both comment on how these two roles differ from each other? Madam Chair, you go first.
Yeah, I can certainly kick that off. So the board's role is one of insight and oversight and foresight. The board needs to take that 50,000-foot view, have their eye on the horizon, be aware of the environment, have an unrelenting focus on the public interest, understanding that the board is accountable for the impact on stakeholders of any decisions that the board takes that the organization then implements. So the board's role is unique. The board, as I mentioned before, the board is an agent of success for the CEO and the management team and the organization. The board's role is not to say, gotcha. The board's role is to say, have you thought about this? Or here's a lived experience that I've had that I'd like to share with you as you contemplate this decision. So it's a partnership, it's a collaboration, it's an additive that makes everything better.
And then management is everything else. So management's role is really to build that organization to ensure you've got the resources and the capacity to achieve that mission vision of the organization and move those strategic pillars forward, and then everything that comes with that. So.
And if I could just build on that, Rachel, you're absolutely right. Once the board has involved itself in the strategic plan of the organization and has good reporting frameworks in place to exercise its fiduciary oversight responsibilities, the board then, you need to have the discipline to get out of the way and let management get the job done, right? And to have check-ins, of course, and always be there as a thinking partner, but nose in, hands out. Don't get yourself involved in the weeds, because if you do, then you won't have that 50,000-foot perspective. You can't have an objective view of something that you've had a hand in doing. So those roles are both very important, but we need to stay in our swim lanes, right? If we're on a team and I'm in my swim lane and you're in yours and I keep crossing over into yours, we're both going to crash and not win the trophy. So know your swim lane, stick to your swim lane, and be there to support.
So what would you both say to a young person, maybe just out of post-secondary, who's starting their career, and that person was offered a chance to sit on a board? Would you say that it's something they should do? Is it a useful step in the development of a career?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And
yeah.
why?
Yeah, I think for a few reasons. One, it really, if you're offered coming out of post-secondary, it allows you to actually use a lot of those skill sets that you've learned and a lot of the theory that you've been taught. You'll be able to see it in practice. And being on a board, you get to see it from different perspectives as well, the board management, depending on where the organization is. The other thing is it really starts your networking. By being on boards, you're going to meet a variety of other individuals because boards need different skill sets. And if you're on a really good board, they've recruited different skill sets around the table. And so it's an opportunity for you to build your network and get to know people with different skill sets so that you can leverage off of it and understand the value of the different skill sets that people bring to the table. Also allows you to give back, which I think is really important. And I think it's scientifically proven, makes you feel good. So.
I couldn't agree with you more. Rachel. And as CEO of our careers, I think that it's important that we embrace every opportunity to expand our own horizons. And to further Rachel's point around perspective, from my own lived experience, I've had the invaluable perspective of being on both sides of the boardroom table, as board chair and as a C-suite executive. So I can bring both of those perspectives to whatever decisions that I'm making. And it's such a great thing to be able to do.
So if that recent post-secondary grad wants to get some board experience early in their career, how do they do that? Like, how can they search out board opportunities that would be appropriate for the stage they're at in their careers?
I can sure talk about how I did it once I had decided that that was something I wanted to have in my career. I started to work my network, as Rachel suggested earlier, and let people know what it is that I'm interested in. Using my 6-word story and understanding what I'm passionate about and what I bring to the table, I researched the different organizations that I would like to help and looked at who's on their board and do I know anyone on the board or do I know anyone who knows anyone on the board, and find a way to introduce myself to the people that run that organization, both from a governance and a management perspective, and just let them know I'm here, I'm interested, I'm ready to volunteer. I think it would be unrealistic for someone very young in their board career to expect to be paid for their board work. That generally comes much later in one's governance career. So letting people know that they've got a willing pair of hands and a brain with a great perspective that wants to volunteer in their organization, people are really happy to have that kind of resource.
That's great advice. Rachel, any thoughts? Any tips?
Yeah, there's so many ways that you can look for opportunities. One, look for things that you're passionate about, and then look for opportunities to get involved in those organizations. And I would guarantee if you've got the skill set, you'll be asked to sit on the board. A lot of families can get involved in what their children are interested in, get involved in their schools, get involved in their activities, and you'll be asked to participate at that board level pretty quickly. The other thing is if you're coming into the CPA profession, you can contact us, and we do have a volunteer job board. And so we have a team that works to match volunteers with board opportunities from large and small. And so if you get it known that you're interested, we will find you somewhere to participate.
Good to know. Well, we're getting close to our wrap-up time. I just have a couple more questions for both of you. So you both have spoken about the need for the chair of a board and the CEO of an organization to be in sync. Can you each say something about what the other has done to build that synchronicity between the two of you? Ruth, what has Rachel done to help build that?
Rachel is really open, and she is someone that I trust implicitly, and she trusts me. So we've got this mutual trusting relationship with one another that I know that she is a great thinking partner for me, not only on CPA business, but when I'm dealing with something else, I'll call Rachel and say, hey, I need a CEO perspective on this. Can you, and of course I sanitize the, whatever it is I'm asking, so I would never betray a confidence, but I'll ask Rachel for her advice. And as a result, our relationship is such that we can talk to each other about anything. And we're both individuals who like to be well prepared. So when we go into meetings with other stakeholders, we like to chat first and be sure that we're on the same wavelength with what it is that we are hoping to achieve from whatever this meeting or event or issue is, and what we think might be the best ways to achieve that. And then we're flexible. We course correct along the way, we text each other, and we come out with a successful outcome.
So trust, openness, flexibility, keys in that achieving that good relationship.
Yeah.
Rachel, what's your take on that?
Yeah, absolutely agree with all that. And I would add making the time. So Ruth has been amazing at making the time to have conversations and to really set that time aside for us to connect and update. And also no surprises. She says that a lot. No surprises. If there's something that she's going to question or something that's not sitting quite right with her, she will let me know. She's like, no surprises. I'm going to bring this up. And that just allows me the time to be able to think and reflect and ensure that I'm not caught off guard by anything that's happening at the board level, which I really appreciate as well. And really just having that opportunity to have conversations with Ruth has been really helpful for me and helpful in mentoring and growing my skill sets as well.
So that makes me think, as a CEO for many years, you go through probably a lot of chairs. Chairs have fixed terms. Is it difficult to adjust from chair to chair, or is it pretty much the same with every chair, the way you approach it?
I think every chair is different, honestly. And so every time you do have a switch in chairs, it is learning what that relationship is going to look like with that chair and how to best operate. And the way I approach a new chair is really having that conversation. Hey, super excited that you're in the chair position. How are we going to work together? Because the way Ruth and I work together might be different than the way my past chair and I work together and the way my future chair and I work together, because we're all different people. We have different needs and we have different ways of working. And so really trying to take a minute to understand that working environment and to know how we can best work together. I always say it's kind of challenging in the CEO position when you have such amazing chairs as I've had the opportunity to have, because you spend 2 years together, like very, very closely together, spending a lot of time together. And then it's like, okay, bye. And then you get someone else who is equally as wonderful and has different strengths as well that complement. But it is a different role as a CEO of an organization such as mine, where you do have the chair changing every 2 years. You spend a lot of time together with the chair. And I have in the past had chairs where I'm like, I wonder how this is going to work. I wonder if we're going to be able to connect. And sometimes it's a bit of a rocky start. I've never had a chair with a rocky ending. So always being able to find a way to work together and really appreciate what each chair brings to the table and to my growth and development. And so it is a little bit odd when we switch over and then you sometimes don't see them very often because they're in a different city or a different industry. And it's great, but it's also a little bit sad.
Ruth, you said you've been on the C-suite side of the boardroom table on occasion, and you probably had to deal with change in chairs. How do you deal with that as a C-suite person?
Yeah, exactly the same as what Rachel's saying. I think that as leaders, it behooves us to adapt to the style of the people that we're working closely with. So understanding someone's style. Some people have a different frequency of what makes them comfortable in terms of, giving them updates and having conversations and that sort of thing. So it's just figuring out what's going to work best for this relationship. And I think usually you have had an opportunity to get to know that person, because often there's sort of a succession plan in place. Someone's a vice chair and then they're the chair. So, it's not a big surprise who your chair is going to be. So you can actually start to build that relationship even before they get into the seat.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Well, I have just one final question for each of you. Can each of you talk briefly about a mentor or inspirational person who's made a positive difference for you in your careers at any point? And how did that person affect your career? You don't need to mention any names if you don't want to. Rachel, you want to kick off?
I always find that's a challenging question because there's just so many people who have helped me to grow and develop and to get where I am today. So maybe since we're on a CPA podcast, I'll focus on the CPA leaders across the country. I've had the fortune of working with many of the CEOs from other CPA organizations across the country. And especially during the early days of me being a CEO, a lot of my colleagues were male at the time, really helping to ensure that my voice was heard at the table, to help me understand some of the things that they had to learn the hard way so I don't fall into those same pitfalls, and really just being there to support and have conversations. I've been super fortunate to work with a variety of individuals across the country who all have really positive strengths to give to the profession, and I've been able to leverage off of that to provide some insights to my leadership and development as well.
Wow, that sounds excellent. Ruth?
So like Rachel, I too have been really privileged to have some amazing mentors, and as well as sponsors. And there's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor. A mentor, in my view, is someone who speaks with you, and a sponsor is someone who speaks about you. And it's really important for us to establish both of those kinds of relationships in our careers as we want to grow our careers and our governance careers as well. So I've had some great mentors and great sponsors.
Well, thanks both of you for those great answers to that question. It can be a tough one, especially as you both noted, there's so many people in the course of one's career who make a difference. So Ruth McHugh, Rachel Miller, thank you. Thank you both for being here and spending so much time with us over these 2 episodes of Uncommon Sense. You've given our listeners so much to think about, and you've given me a lot to think about too. So I've appreciated your willingness to speak openly and to share some of the knowledge and wisdom you've acquired over the course of your careers. So thank you both for being here. It's been a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
It's been fun.
It was great.
The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Hesje CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center was created through a generous donation to the CPA Education Foundation by the late Brian Hesje. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. His generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. We would like to acknowledge that the CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments on the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Hesje CPA Knowledge Center, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.